All right, grade 15. Let's start chapter 4. Really, actually, kind of an interesting chapter. A little bit boring, yes, I get it, but sort of interesting because it's talking about how to become an ethical professional. It also talks about how becoming an ethical human being, and it kind of talks about the whole concept of how ethics, how your brain basically processes ethical decisions and things like that. It's actually really kind of interesting. Well, these are the learning objectives. If you want, you can pause on that and go ahead and read that. But these are kind of the things that we're going to talk about, at least at the beginning of this PowerPoint presentation, but biological factors. So, excuse me. So there are at least some basic concepts of how your brain works, or how the brain works, and how we process decision making, and how chemicals in your brain, in your body, lead you toward making certain decisions. Oxytocin, which is not Oxycontin, oxytocin, serotonin, and testosterone, are three different hormones that cause your brain to react different ways to certain stimuli or scenarios or decisions. And your book has some pretty interesting scenarios in it that talk about each of these hormones. And oxytocin is described as, at least by one of the researchers, I think his name is Paul Zak, as the moral molecule. And basically, oxytocin is considered the hormone that makes your brain consider making moral or ethical decisions. Interesting. It helps you to focus on bonding, on being more motherly, which I think is kind of interesting. It is the chemical that's released when mothers are bonding with their children, as opposed to testosterone, which is, not surprisingly, I'm guessing for most of you, a more aggressive type of hormone that is released when more aggressive behavior is deemed appropriate. Interesting. Then we move on to there is a man named Phineas Gage. What year was this? I don't know what year Mr. Gage took place. But however, Phineas Gage was a shy, kind, decent human being until the day that he had he had frontal lobe damage, an accident where an iron spike impaled him into his frontal lobe, the frontal lobe of his brain. Frontal lobe being the area where the more moral and ethical decision making is made. And after he had this frontal lobe damage, he suddenly turned into a very, what they called him, quick to anger, unpleasant, and quarrelsome. So his behavior, his moral behavior, his ethical behavior changed after he had injury to his frontal lobe. So a lot of people would say that genetics have no impact on moral and ethical behavior. Others would say that it does, that biological or chemical hormonal influences do have an impact on moral and ethical behavior. Again, I already mentioned that oxytocin was defined as that moral molecule, or that hormone that was something that's released that does help to encourage moral and ethical behavior. And I know I'm not trying to be sexist here, but women do tend to have more of the oxytocin and less of the testosterone. So there were studies that found that, what does it say? Men were more likely to be aggressive and hyperactive, impulsive, and have ADHD than men because of, according to this study, the oxytocin versus testosterone argument. So kind of interesting. Frontal lobe of the brain is implicit in empathy, shame, and moral reasoning. So individuals with that frontal lobe damage sometimes can have the unethical behaviors. Interesting. Okay, the learning theory is that we talk about a lot in how people's behavior forms. So this is not a biological concept. This is more of a social concept. People might learn unethical behavior. Okay, so back here we're talking about biological factors. Why are people unethical? Biology. They are born that way. Maybe they have frontal lobe damage. Maybe it's the chemicals in their bodies. Maybe it's because they're women as opposed to men, okay? Moving on, we're talking about more social factors. Maybe their behavior is learned. Maybe they modeled it after behavior they learned from their parents. Maybe after they behaved unethically or dishonestly, they were reinforced. They were praised for that behavior. Maybe they were given rewarded for that behavior. You know, maybe their parents stole things and they were rewarded by having nice things because they stole. So that behavior was reinforced by this whole learning theory. So that unethical behavior was learned as opposed to biology and part of their DNA or their makeup. Okay, so we're talking back here two different ideas on how this immoral, unethical behavior is learned. Okay, so now that we're going to move on again to another concept, the moral stage theory. Okay, moral development. This guy's idea, Kohlberg, believed basically that it was your moral development is just part of growing up. Okay, so he initially broke it down into a bunch of different steps, kind of like, you know, growing up and learning how to do anything else in life. Your moral development is just part of that development, like learning how to talk or think or use a fork. I don't know, any of that kind of stuff. So his premise was that moral development, like physical growth or anything else that you learn or mature as you age, occurs in stages, in qualitative as opposed to quantitative stages. Each stage forms whole before the next stage begins. They form in sequence. No one bypasses any stage. You have to finish one whole sequence according to Kohlberg until you get to the next. And it always, again, these always happen in order according to him. I'm basically trying to translate this. Okay, so he says stage one, and your book has this kind of laid out. There's a whole chart on page 88. Basically, stage one, punishment, obedience. This is like when you're a little kid and your mom slaps your hand because you're going to go touch the oven or the stove. And you are a little kid and you submit to authority. Okay, your mom says don't touch that. She slaps your hand. She gently slaps your hand. She doesn't beat you, but you know what I mean. She gently slaps your hand. And you don't really understand, but you do it because your mom tells you not to, okay? Then stage two you you become aware that your mom is mad about something, and you want to please your mom. So you basically do whatever because you love your mom and you don't want to see your mom upset. Okay. So what is it? Instrument relativity orientation. Stage 3, the individual performs conventionally determined good behavior to be considered a good person. Okay, so maybe you go to school and you do what you're supposed to do because when you're in class with your classmates, you want your teacher to like you, and you want your classmates to like you because you want to fit in with your classmates and with your friends. Stage 4 has that more law and order orientation. The individual is concerned not just with interpersonal relationships, but also with rules set down by society. Okay, so you're kind of growing up. You can see stage 1, you're just, mom told you not to do something, so you don't do it. Stage 2, you look at mom and you know she's upset with you, and you're like, whoa, I don't want mom to be mad at me, so I'm going to try and do whatever makes mom happy. Stage 3, you want your whole class to like you. You want to do the right thing and be a good boy or a good girl. Stage 4, you realize, whoa, I'm part of this society and I want to do right by everyone because otherwise I'm going to get in trouble, and there are laws and rules in this society. Stage 5, person recognizes interests larger than just the current laws. This individual is able to evaluate the morality of laws in a historical context and feels an obligation to the law because its benefit to societal survival. Okay, we're starting to get deep here. You're growing up. You guys are probably here or in stage 6 now. You're like, whoa, there's a reason why I am part of this society and why I'm supposed to do this or not do this. It's because it's for the good of all. And then stage 6, the person has reached this stage, bases moral judgment on the higher abstract laws of truth, justice, and morality. So these are Kohlberg's moral stage theories. So now we're moving on to the work group and organizational influence. So now we're trying to actually become an ethical co-worker or human being. Individuals sometimes behave in ways that are contrary to the belief of their systems when exposed to external influences. Now, I can tell you, as having been an employee and having to work for an agency, were there times when I was forced to do things or say things maybe that I didn't necessarily believe in for the good of my department? Absolutely. It is a very difficult place to be in. I used to work, like I said, in a courtroom, and I can remember specifically, I'm just going to throw it out there, I worked for an agency. We had a correctional facility. We had the Fresno County, we had the Elkhorn Correctional Facility boot camp. If there was bed space in that boot camp, we needed to keep that boot camp full, because if it wasn't full, we didn't get money. We needed to keep it full in order to keep it funded. Were there times when there might have been a case or two that maybe wasn't the best case for that program, but we needed to fill that bed? So I was encouraged to argue to send a kid to boot camp who, it wasn't an illegal thing, but maybe he didn't necessarily need that program. Yeah, there were times when I was encouraged to say, if we don't fill this program, we're going to have to close the whole thing down. Ethically, morally, that's a tough spot to be in. I was fortunate in that most of the judges that I worked with, I knew, and they knew the position that I was in. They knew that the boot camp wasn't full. They knew that I didn't have an option but to argue for filling that program. So oftentimes they were on the same page I was, realizing that I was making an argument because, oh gosh, this sounds, I know, it's tough. It's really hard. You have to make it, you have to make a call based on the needs of your department as opposed to based on your own ethical beliefs. And typically that child did not end up going to the boot camp, because I think typically the judges would read between the lines and understand, this argument's being made because it has to be made, not because it should be made. Anyways, you're going to be put in positions where you have to do things that don't necessarily feel good. And it's not going to be fun. But moving on. All right, so this is Bandura's mechanisms. Talks about moral justification. Terrorists are a good example of moral justifications. A lot of times they're able to justify what they do by saying, well, I'm a terrorist. I can justify what I'm doing because the reason why I'm doing it underneath all of this is it's justified. I believe in what I'm doing, so I can kill whoever I want to. Euphemistic labeling. Think the word damage control or collateral damage. Collateral damage, euphemistic labeling. Collateral damage is a bunch of people who died as a result of they died innocent victims, let's say. Innocent victims can sometimes equal the same thing as collateral damage. Advantageous comparison. I like this one. I don't like it. I'm being sarcastic. We've killed civilians, but we've never used chemical weapons on them. Oh, okay. Well, that makes it all better, right? Displacement of responsibility. I was only following orders, right? Okay. Diffusion of responsibility. Everyone else is doing it, right? Have we all said that before? Everyone else is driving 95 on the freeway. Sorry, guys, that's been me before. Disregard or distortion of consequences. The insurance will take care of it. Oh, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that one. Or dehumanization. A lot of people will use this type of an excuse or justification in high crime neighborhoods. Well, clearly nobody else cares about this house, so why should I not go smash the window out too? Because nobody else took care of it. Things like that. So I'm going to kind of skip through this. So there have been a lot of studies that have taken place to try to measure the ethical climate of certain organizations. They use something called the Ethical Climate Questionnaire, and they have asked questions of many different agencies to try and figure out what the ethical climate is of the agency. And it's interesting to try and figure out how agencies rate as far as the ethical climate. And one of the things that they did find was that agencies where employees were very overworked were the ones where employees were more likely to end up making unethical decisions. Overworked employees typically were those that were going to be making unethical decisions, which I thought was kind of interesting, which sort of makes sense. You're swamped, you're crazy busy. Are you more likely to possibly cut corners? I don't know. Kind of makes sense. But think ethics training. There are police officers go through, police officers and everybody, law enforcement, corrections, all of these agencies go through ethics training regularly. Or they should. Let's say that. And I should clarify, I worked for a pretty decent size agency, Fresno County Probation Department, between the deputy probation officers and the juvenile correctional officers and all the other staff. It's a decent sized agency. The probation department does run not only like I said, the probation side, which is all the probation officers, but they also run the juvenile hall. So all of those correctional officers are also under that umbrella. So we had a pretty organized and large training system. Ethics training was definitely part of that. I can guarantee you that the Fresno Police Department is very well organized in their training as well. However, beginning of this whole chapter, we talked about ethics and where they come from. Is ethics something that can be taught in an 8-hour training session? We just talked about the fact that ethics is something that might be biological, okay? Chemicals, not chemicals, but you know what I mean, hormones or portions of the brain working properly, or learned behavior that is either through Kohlberg's stages or things that we learned from our parents from day one. How easy do you think it is to train someone to be ethical? Especially in a super stressful environment. Imagine being a police officer. Do you think that those days are stressful? Do you think that they're overworked? Again, think the Fresno Police Department. We are in January of 2021. We have had a significant number of murders already in the city of Fresno. It's not an easy task, and it's not something to take lightly. Ethics and teaching someone how to be ethical, very difficult. So the key to me, this is going to be my opinion, sorry guys, finding an ethical person before you hire them. You have to find an ethical person and then continue with that ongoing regular ethics training. Make sure that the person is a moral, ethical person to begin with. How do you assess that? Good question, right? But moral ethics training needs to be something that's more than 8 hours a year. And I would be willing to bet that that's what's required at this point. I know for probation, I doubt that we were even required to do 8 hours a year of ethics training. We had 40 hours a year training total that's required after you get hired. And I'm guessing the same is required by post for police officers. So how do you make sure your officers are ethically trained? Well, ethical leadership is definitely a step in the right direction. Create an environment conducive to dignified treatment on the job, increase ethical awareness, avoid deception and manipulation, allow for openness of free flow of unclassified information, shared values, demonstrate obligation to honesty, fairness, and decency, and discuss use of corruption publicly. These things that you think happen in regular police agencies. And that's just a question. I don't know the answer to this. Organizational culture is subject to external influences. Things like social media, right? So consider ethics and how the police are portrayed to the community by outside factors. And these are just things that maybe you could consider. Done.